There was a lot of discussion about precedent, effectively, not just the precedents of the past and how they should apply to whether Donald Trump should stay on the ballot, but what will happen if they decide to let the Colorado decision be upheld. I would say that maybe the majority of the discussion was directly or indirectly about that. Here's one instance of it. Justice Kagan asked the lawyer for the Colorado voters, this is not the Trump lawyer, why Colorado should be able to decide unilaterally to keep Trump off the ballot and affect the whole country. That seems a bit extraordinary, does it? And I point that out because that's Kagan. Like, a lot of people were making this point. It wasn't just Justice Thomas or Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett. No, the quote unquote libs on the court were doing it as well. That seems a bit extraordinary, doesn't it? Well, yeah, because there was a coup, which is sort of by its very nature extraordinary. Should it be routine? No, it shouldn't be routine. But I'm also worried about attempts to overturn the results of election becoming routine. That's what your job is to stop. We are trying to make it so this one line that should have never been crossed is at the very least not crossed again. But they seem terrified of what effect there could be. And they got into all these arguments that we've previewed before, wherein, well, okay, you say that this is an insurrection. Colorado says it, their Supreme Court says it, and they want to bar him for that. But we know that there will be a lot of Republican states that'll bar Joe Biden. And the judge says, the lawyer for the Colorado voters, I think rightly says, well, simply because some people may do like sort of sham versions of this, you still have to rule on the constitutionality of it. And they didn't accept that at all. And I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not even saying that they have to agree with me that the various red states that responded to the Colorado decision were being disingenuous, that they didn't really mean it, that the state of the border is Joe Biden committing an insurrection, or giving money to Iran, which he didn't do, would be insurrection. I think that that's transparent, that they don't actually mean that. But even if you believe that there could theoretically be some sort of a slippery slope, do you know who would decide where the line is drawn for what qualifies as insurrection? It would be the Supreme Court. And I know that that's inconvenient for them. They theoretically might have to work, they might have to write something down. Oh my God, they might be criticized as a result of it. But you could draw lines. You could say, for instance, if you send a mob to the Capitol and they sack it and they try to hunt down your political opponents or even your political allies to kill them, I think we can all agree that that's on one side of the line and simply being a Democrat is on the other side. But the thing is, they don't seem to want to be the ones who have to define that. And it's not just the Republicans, the Democrats as well. They are very worried about the consequences of their decision. When I think if they want to be worried about the consequences of something, they could maybe be worried about the consequences of inaction, of allowing someone who has already tried to overthrow the government to once again be on the ballot and be in a position come next November, December, and January to maybe try it again, and maybe successfully this time. Like, I know for them it's a little bit abstract. That's a thing that happened at the Capitol or whatever, but they could storm the Supreme Court. They could storm wherever it is that you live. Like, I know that you didn't have to run for your lives through the halls of Congress, but it could come to that. And so anyway, they seem very ready to abdicate their responsibility, their ethical obligation as the final arbiters of the Constitution, to be the ones that, if no one else will, to protect democracy, to protect the inherent fundamental nature of our country, and they don't seem to want to do that. Instead, it's gonna be the semantics. So did he engage in an insurrection? What exactly is an officer of the United States? Well, did he take an oath to support the Constitution? Because like theoretically he hadn't held office before. Like if you listened to the argumentation, that's the sort of stuff that it came down to. And I understand that very often the role of the Supreme Court is to concern themselves with language, but they also appear to be very influenced by consequences. Like your fear about what Texas or North Dakota might do is not fundamentally a semantic thing. You're worried about interpretation and the next steps on this. So why are you not worried about the other side of that? You only seem to be worried about that when it comes to blocking access, not to not blocking access. And so look, my read right now is that I do not think that they are going to uphold Colorado's bar. And look, there are cases to be made. You could say that, well, at the end of the day, it really does come down to language and, oh, they figured out this thing where it's an office of the United States rather than an office under the United States. It's literally what they're arguing about. And if they accept any one of those individual semantic points that are being made by the Trump team, then theoretically, they can use that as sort of a narrow way to allow him to stay on the ballot without actually ruling on the larger issue, which is, what do you do when someone commits a coup? And they don't want to do that. Now, they might say that it's a semantic thing, and they would like textually be correct. But can we also bear in mind the bias? Clarence Thomas is involved in this questioning. Clarence Thomas, the guy who, by the way, is helping to lead some of this conversation about the consequences and all that, a guy who previously was only worried about the strict text of all of this stuff, suddenly is much more worried about social context. He's involved in this thing. He did not step down or recuse himself from this decision, despite the fact that his wife, Ginny Thomas, was a participant in January 6th. I mean, she wasn't kicking down the office. I don't think she has the door to close the office. I don't think she has any more capacity to do that than Donald Trump does. But she was a participant in it. She was a spreader of these conspiracy theories. And you might say, well, I don't know if that rises to the level of where he should recuse himself. But I will say that if the spouse of Kagan or Jackson had done something like this on the other side, the right would not be as concerned about the precedent that might be set. And look, there are other issues. I wish that I could summarize all of it. I wish that we had been able to do live commentary alongside it. Actually, that would have been useful. Kavanaugh, for instance, jumped in and he said, it shouldn't necessarily come down to this particular clause if your concern is about insurrectionists holding office, because there's another way that you can bar them from office. You can criminally prosecute them for that insurrection, and they will therefore be barred from holding office, which, by the way, that is an element that will definitely be challenged by the Trump team. Kavanaugh can simply state it as a fact, but they're gonna be back in session debating that in the next few months probably. And in the meantime, look, they don't, the right doesn't accept that either. They don't think that it would be valid to convict him for this. So I don't know, it seems like excuse after excuse after excuse. That's what we're getting. And meanwhile, for reasonable Americans, we know what the intent of that amendment is. We know why there is a component of trying to bar people who rebelled effectively against our system of government from holding office. And the idea that it should bar people from extremely low level offices from holding that office, but not the president, not the former president, is utter madness. You cannot state that you think that that is the intent of those who wrote it with a straight face. You can only say that you want to ignore that because it would impinge on Donald Trump's political future. That's it. The only thing I can say that's kind of good news coming out of this is that we'll probably get the decision soon. Now, generally, after argumentation, it takes something like 3 months before they issue some sort of decision. That seems untenable considering that the Republican primary will be long over by then, I would assume. So we can expect that it'll be expedited. Much of the discussion was in line with what we expected. So there's no reason that it should take a long time, but it's obviously gonna have a massive effect. And by the way, I will close on this section with this. I agree with them that if you were to bar Donald Trump, there will probably be negative consequences of that. That is the issue that you have with a guy who is the cult leader of a rabid, oftentimes violent political faction. But the idea that we can't afford to bar someone from office because their followers are too deranged, that seems to be flipping logic on its head. That seems like exactly the sort of person that should be barred from office, particularly when they've already tried to overturn the results of an election. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.